Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Carly Byrnes, Senior Editor of the Milton Boon Historical Romance series, and I'm joined today by three of our wonderful historical romance authors, Sarah Mallory, Laura Martin and Lucy Morris. So Sarah Mallory is an award-winning novelist with more than 30 books, I think it is now, published by Milton Boon, set in the Regency and more Regency, the Georgian period as well. Her latest release is The Laird's Runaway Wife, and that concludes her Laird's of Ardvarric trilogy, which is set between the wild Scottish Highlands and London. Laura Martin also writes for the Regency era as well, but with a bit of an adventurous undercurrent to her stories. And when not writing, Laura spends her time working as a doctor. Laura's title, you may have seen, The Captain's Impossible Match, was a recent Duchess of York Historical Book Club pick. And Laura's current release, The Marquis Meets His Match, which is available next month, is the start of her new Match Made Marriages series. And Lucy Morris is a new author for the series who's really made a splash with her Viking era romances. Lucy's last title, A Nun for the Viking Warrior, was a bit of a book talk sensation as well. And her next release, The Viking She Would Have Married, is the start of her Shield Maiden Sisters trilogy. So lots of very strong, fearless heroines, which we really love to see in the series. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about these books a bit later on in the conversation. So I'll begin just by hearing a bit about how you came to write for Milton Boon and what really drew you into the romance genre. So Sarah, do you want to start us off?
I was writing, actually published by another publisher, a small publisher, and met Milton Boon editor who suggested I might like to write for them and send something in. So it was one of those serendipity meetings that sometimes do happen. And that was in 2008. So I've been writing ever since.
Amazing. And Laura, how about you?
So I never really knew that I liked romance or historical romance when I first started writing. And I knew that I loved writing. So I was writing anything, everything, trying to find that area that I really enjoyed and that worked for me. And one day I went into a library, and just sitting there on a shelf was a historical romance. And I thought, I'll get that along with the normal books that I would pick up. And I completely fell in love with it. And I thought, wow, maybe this is where I need to be writing. And so I sort of did a few short things. And the So You Think You Can Write competition was coming up. I'd seen it online, and I submitted the first couple of chapters to that, and it just took off from there.
Oh yes, the competitions could be a really great entry point, can't they? Because I think to you, it was a sort of a submissions call that attracted you as well, wasn't it, to submit?
I got so I've always had a love of historical romance. I've always been I've loved reading them. So I read a lot, from early teens up until whenever. And I just thought, I started getting more and more into creative writing, but I was very kind of shy and, quite nervous about doing it. And then as I got older, I thought, just give it a go, just have a go at it. And I wrote loads of different things, trying to get an idea of what I'd like, but actually, just when I started writing a historical, I was like, why haven't I written a historical before? I love reading them. Why haven't I written one? And loved it. And then actually it just felt, again, like serendipity. It was like I finished the book, and there was a blitz with Milton Boon, who my dream publisher, for Warriors Wanted. And mine happened to be a Viking novel. So I submitted with that. And then, it just seemed to spiral, because then I was part of the R&A, and I had a one-to-one with Linda Fieldue, who was one of the editors looking at those submissions. So it just, it's because when I had my one-to-one with her, she was like, I've read your first chapter from the submission, but I've then gone to also read what you've submitted for the Blitz. And it was just really great, how it just kind of spiraled.
Yes, lots of hard work, but also a little dash of luck and
It is. Yeah,
definitely. And so, what sort of what draws you to the eras that you write in? So we've got a bit of a mixture here between Regency, Georgian and Viking. So Laura, what is it about the Regency era that kind of really inspires you and captures your imagination?
Oh, there's so many things. That I love all the rules, how things are different now to how they were then, and all the little rules that they had to obey and the places people had in society. And what I love about that is using that as a bit of a framework for a book, but then breaking those rules and saying, okay, this is how it would have been most of the time, but how can I break those little rules and put my own spin on it? And I just find that really fun. I also like the sort of settings that you can have. So the big country houses, the ballrooms of London. I think it is a wonderful place to read about and also to write about.
Yeah, it's super glamorous, isn't it? But you're right, you absolutely need to break some of those rules, otherwise nothing exciting ever would happen, wouldn't it, if everyone went everywhere with a chaperone? So Lucy, the Viking era is obviously a bit of a world away from the kind of Regency ballrooms of London.
I know. Well, there's a lot less known about it, really. So it's and actually is being discovered every day. We discover new things archaeologically. So what I quite liked about it is actually when I was growing up, I had a little like Usborne's Viking Norse mythology book, and I read those stories and I just thought they were so magical and so full of myths and legends, and just really there was a lot of fantasy to them that I just really enjoyed. And I think that aspect of that period in time just always appeals to me because it is just so fantastical and just really interesting and fascinating time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Sarah, so obviously Regency is one, but also Georgian too. What kind of inspired that?
I think actually I started liking the Georgian period first. I think it really goes back to when I was very young, and you'd go to the pantomime. The Cinderella was always in Georgian dress when we used to go, and it was the really big hooped dresses and the white wigs and everything. And I just fell in love with the costumes. And then as you start reading the history more, you find out you just get drawn into that world. It looks very glamorous, and then you find out it's a little bit harsher than the pictures may show. And Georgian and Regency, they seem fairly accessible. They're distant, but they still seem fairly accessible as to modern readers. I think Lucy's job is a lot more difficult writing about the Vikings. So.
It's good. It's freeing in a way as well, because you have to do a lot of research, but then at the same time, you can kind of forgive yourself because not everything's known anyway. So it's known as Dark Ages for a reason. So it's kind of it kind of frees you a little bit as well, because you can guess things, because that's what archaeologists are doing. They're just guessing a lot of what they believed happened, and it's interesting.
Yeah. And I know when I started writing the Highland series, the Scottish history is so different because the costumes and the culture is very different. And the history is actually quite bloody as well, I must admit. But it's somewhere between the Viking and the Regency, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Actually, there's quite a nice romanticism with the Highlanders, though. I think, whereas which is sometimes a bit lacking in Vikings, because it is quite brutal a period in history. So there's a bit more. There's a bit more romance with a Highlander.
Yeah, well, that's the trick. That's what we have to do as authors, is to put the romance into it, isn't it? So
definitely,
you have to balance all that carefully crafted research and sort of wear it quite lightly, don't you, in the final product?
Yeah, you want it to be dressed up and beautiful as a historical and atmospheric and fabulous, but at the same time, there's some things that maybe not right for somebody who wants to read about a loving romance. Some things we should miss.
Absolutely, but you sort of touched on this, but I was going to ask a bit more about kind of how you do your research. Laura, is there a particular starting point you have? I suppose once you've built up that knowledge of that particular era, you can kind of keep stepping into that world.
Yeah, and I love it now, because when I started writing, I knew a bit about the Regency, but I was reading quite a few books about it. I was trying to build up some of that basic knowledge, and I feel like that world is there. I know how to craft that basic world now in the Regency without too much research. What I love now is getting lost in the personal stories. So, if I'm flicking through a book and you hear sort of anecdotes of how people were actually living, of the scandals that they went through, and you think, some of this, if I wrote this in a book, people would not believe at all. They would say that is the most unbelievable thing ever. But it does then spark off ideas. It sparks off, well, okay, I'm not going to use this whole story, but what if this little bit happened? What if that little bit happened? And I love those sort of more personal anecdotes now that you can weave in, and you're always learning. So, I mean, even for my latest book, I spent ages finding out sort of about carriage rides and how long things would take, and just dropping those little details in. I love that each time I learn something new.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I with my Shield Maiden series, because this is the first book in it, I read a fabulous research book, this one, River Kings by Kat Yarman, and it goes on about the route that the Vikings took to get to Constantinople, and it's not the way that you would think. It's like actually up through the Baltic, up through Russia, and then down through Eastern Europe to the Black Sea, and that just kind of blows your mind straight away. And you're like, well, how long did that take? And trying to work out the knots, like the average knots of a Viking ship, and how long it would take, and how many days, and if they need to stop, and yeah, it's fascinating. But I think you kind of have to. I mean, I condensed mine a bit. Mine's a very fast trip, so there's a little bit of poetic license. But I love research. I love reading new books about it, and like even just Shield Maidens in general, that's been turned on its head recently, because a Burka warrior grave has for ages been thought of as like a king or a military leader, and that's just suddenly been DNA testing has proved it's a woman. So it's fascinating things like that, where a lot of people will say, oh, the Shield Maidens are just in the mythology, they're not real people. And then
But they are.
There's something that's come out that proves that what it was. So it's just fascinating.
Well, I know when I was first starting off writing historicals, and someone's advised, must have been a workshop or something, and a writer advised, if you're looking at a new era or a certain period that you're not familiar with, start with a children's history book, because they pick out the main things, and then you can drill down into the bits that you need. Otherwise, there is just so much history out there, you can really get lost in it.
Yeah, you can be a bit overwhelmed, actually. If anyone was thinking of like trying history and hadn't got a background in history, like I didn't have a background in history, I love it now, but I didn't have a background in it. And like children's books and stuff is actually quite a good starting point for you to kind of just get the basics, and then actually you don't mind reading the big books about it, because you've got that basis to work on.
It gives you a framework, doesn't it? I do feel what we do is put the history as it's like a background that in a tapestry, and we put our characters into it. So
it's a great one. It's woven in, isn't it? It's like just to make it beautiful.
That's it. It brings that authenticity, doesn't it? And it just but you'll get, like you say, you just conjure the world. So you're not hitting people over the head with a textbook info, but it's those little nuggets, isn't it, that just make it feel so authentic. Sorry, Laura.
And I think you need that background. You need to know enough about it so that you're not putting sort of big facts in, so that you're just adding that flavour. But you have to know what the bigger picture is, but then you can just add little bits as you go. And it makes it much more subtle and much better to read than if you put whole chunks of the historical events through your books.
And it can inspire you as well. You can like learn something and then be like, oh God, I'd love to put that in a book. And it just kind of rattles about in your brain, doesn't it? You're like, I must use that tool or that thing that they were doing, or that craft that was like important in that time. And you're like, oh, I'd love to put that in.
So yeah, well, that's obviously a lot of goes into the research, and it's so interesting to hear the little nuggets and how you approach it and the little tips you picked up along the way. So what is your kind of writing process and routine like then, Sarah? Do you sort of start with the research, or is it that idea that grabs you initially? What kind of
I think now I tend to be looking at something and I get an idea, and then you have to decide where it will fit in the history. Sometimes it's a real event. You might be reading something and come across a snippet of history or an event, and you think that would make a good basis for a story, and you see where it would fit, and then go into it and look back at the surrounding history, the time, what was, world events, anything that's going on. So it's a mixture now, but I always find as I'm writing, as I'm going through, there's always something I need to find out, something extra. So you never stop learning.
No, not at all. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, definitely. And so Laura, obviously you're writing around quite a busy day job as well. So what kind of, where does it sort of?
Yes. So I find now, I used to like to, when I had, before children probably, when I had a little bit more time to, I've never been a big planner, so I do sort of get an idea and then I just write and sort of see where it takes me, and then work on some of the structure a little bit more when I'm going back and going editing it. But now it's very much I carve out sort of chunks of time when I can. So very much I like to be I always write sort of in chapter basis. So I like to write a chapter and then either write another one if I've got enough time, or stop there, but I'll always plan out the next chapter. So I'm always looking one chapter ahead, what's going to happen there. And I don't like to look too much further than that, because I do sometimes get a bit bored if I know exactly where the story is going. But I would always stop sort of on my day when I'm writing, so I know what the next chapter is, so I can, if I've got half an hour of time, just dive straight back into it. And really kind of pick it up and run with it for however long I do have.
Yeah, I always think it's tough as writers, because you have to go when the inspiration takes you, and it's not a job, is it, that can fit neatly into certain hours. So
I mean, I plot quite a lot, but I do think I'm quite a slow writer. So like I don't know how you do it with like a job, and I mean, I struggle around my kids, let alone anything else. But I always like plot, and then kind of, I don't like to plot too much into too fine detail, because like you say, it can actually deaden the story to you. But I do like to plot, and I like to know where I'm going and kind of the end. And I tend to write a really scrappy first draft, which I don't even look back on. I'm just write. And then I go back and flesh it out and kind of like develop the characters and stuff. But I usually start with an image, funnily enough. Like I usually start with like, my inspiration is usually like an image will come to me. So, I mean, I had with this book, I had like a couple of images that came to mind. And one was like sailing into Constantinople as a couple. I thought, oh, that'd be such a romantic like image. And then the other one was 3 little girls playing runes, and I thought, oh, like 3 sisters, and that's where the series idea developed. But yeah, it's funny how like other things will affect your inspiration as well. You're not necessarily it can be just a spark or an image or something you've read in, like Sarah said, like something you've read and want to include.
And very much it's a what if, isn't it?
Yes.
Writing.
Yeah. See what would happen.
Yes. Yeah.
And so for any sort of aspiring authors that might be watching this, Laura, do you have any sort of top tips or advice that you would give?
So just keep writing. I mean, I think the main thing is, if you do want to be a writer and you want to write in a particular genre, you just have to write. And there's so many excuses not to, and so many things that can sort of pull on our time. But I think actually, if you do sit down and you write as much as you can, every day would be ideal, but people don't always have that time. But you're making sure that you're writing regularly, because it's like anything else, you get into it more, you hone it more if you are doing it regularly. And so I think I think it'd be very hard to to write a full-fledged perfect book first time if you haven't done all of the work beforehand. So it's just keep writing.
Yeah, definitely. And Lucy, what about you? Anything else to add?
Write what you love. I think would be my top tip. Not try to write something because you think it'll be easy, or because you think anything that you love to read would be too hard for you, because I think you've got to write what you're really passionate about, and that's the way to succeed, because you'll finish the book, which is the main thing that I would give any writer. Finish the whole book, edit it, and then you can start thinking about, sending it off to people and stuff, because the book changes so much from like the start to the finish, and you might find that actually you should have started the book 3 chapters in, like things like that. So yeah, it's like that would be my couple of tips, really. Yeah,
absolutely. Especially, it must be particularly for historicals, because of all the research you have to do and almost immerse yourself, that having that love.
I think I did with when I thought, just give it a go, just give pick your favorite era and just give it a go. And I did, but I first of all bought from the library a couple of books about the era and stuff, and just read those at first, just to kind of get myself an idea, and then read some Milton Boon historicals as well for a bit of inspiration and ideas. And just if you love to read it, then why wouldn't you love to write it? So that'd be my tip.
Yeah.
What about you, Sarah? Any top tips?
Basically the same. It has to come from the heart. And someone told me years ago, don't get it right, get it written. And then you can edit. You can always edit it, but you can't edit an empty page. So it's got to be there. And then you can tidy it up and flesh it out and do what you need to, but get it written first. So, yeah.
I know so many people that have written the first 3 chapters of about 100 books and just not got, they'd have about 20 books if they put all those 3 chapters together. So I just think, you can't edit a blank page is such a good tip, and it does get you through that first draft, because you're just don't worry about how bad it is, or who you're going to submit it to, or anything like that. Just get it written, and then you can take it from there.
I think it's so true. The first 3 chapters of any book are quite fun to write, and then you always, no matter how many you've written, you always hit that slump, don't you? Of okay, what happens next? I'm past that kind of first initial exciting bit. Where do we go with this? And that's when the hard work really starts, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yes. Yeah, it's keeping up the momentum and the excitement to keep people turning the page to find out, because basically they know, especially if you're writing romance, they know that it's going to have or they hope it's going to have a happy ending, but it's how you get there. They never, you've got to make them want to know, or invest in your characters enough to carry on reading to the end. So.
Yeah, it's such a good tip, and particularly from an editor's point of view, if we read those 3 chapters that we love, then we want to read the full quickly. So if you've got it written, you can send it, but if you've then got to write it, you're then waiting. So I would absolutely second all those top tips for sure. So if you could go back in time, is there a particular era you'd want to go to? Is it that, does that sort of link up with the eras that you write in, or is there anywhere else that you would really, if you could go back there for a little while, that you'd like to do? Laura, I don't know, is Regency where you'd go, or would you venture?
I don't know. I definitely would want to stop off at the Regency, but I've always wanted to go to ancient Rome. I love sort of ancient history as well. I think the Regency era, there's a lot which is very different to how we live today, but there are also many similarities where I think life in somewhere like ancient Rome will be so completely different. I don't know if I'd want to stay very long, and I'd certainly want to be one of the wealthier people there when I went. But I think it would be an amazing place to go and just see how different things were back then and how everything worked.
Yeah, definitely. And Lucy, what about you? Would you go back to the Viking era, or would you?
I don't know. And do you know what's really struggles with it? Like, I am from a long, long line of peasants, so I really worry for myself in any
We're
era.
back in time.
I'd be like the toothless peasant, like scraping in the mud. So I don't. I'd be very nervous about going back in time. But do you know what? If I could go back, it's frocks for me as well. Oh, I'd love a Tudor dress, or like an Elizabethan dress, or a Byzantine silk, or something like that. Oh, yeah, I'd be more about the clothing. I'd want to go on and like wear the clothing and see what it was like. But yeah, I'm not too keen, just because I don't think I'd survive. But
Right, the clothing's quite enticing, but I'm sure after half an hour in a corset, we'd all.
I'd not survive either. I don't think I'd survive if I was wealthy, because I wouldn't cope in the dress. But I'd love it for the 5 minutes I was in it.
And what about you, Sarah?
Part of me would like to go back to the Georgian and Regency, but I'd have to be very rich, I think. And powerful. I really don't want to get into any trouble back there, because it sounds awful. But I do really like the battle scenes. I do love military history, but I'm not sure I'd want to be actually on the ground. I'd like to be some sort of observer, standing back and just knowing what was going on, which would be almost impossible if you're actually on a battlefield and surrounded by smoke and guns and noise and blood and everything. But yeah, so some sort of time machine that hovered like a drone above everything would be quite nice.
Little flavour for everything.
Quite safe. I want to be safe.
And so, and when we sort of touched on this a little bit, but in terms of sort of inspiration for kind of specific stories, where does that come from? Would you say, Sarah?
For me, it can come from anything. Reading a snippet of information, going on holiday, especially to visiting old houses or scenery. This Highland series, The Lairds of Ardvarrick, was basically travelling up through the Scottish Highlands, and just you could feel how old everything was, and it definitely needed adventure. It's a very, very harsh place, so it had to be an adventure romance for that. So yeah, anything can spark it off.
You just like a lot of castles around there as well. I love a castle.
Yes.
Like, I love going to a castle.
Yes, yeah. And just a little, you see some little artifact somewhere if you're looking in a museum or in a castle, and that can really inspire you. So yeah.
And what about you, Lucy? I know I hear you on the castle front. You sort of then start to imagine, don't you, who lived here and what went on. And
yeah, I love going to like places like that. And there's so many places now that COVID's kind of hopefully on its way out. I would love, I mean, it's closed for a bit, I think, but there's the Norwegian boat museum with like Viking ships in and the Osberg ships in. I'd love to go see them, because I think seeing them in the flesh would be just amazing. And like they've also got quite a few in Norway of like Viking reenactment towns and stuff, and I'd love to go there, because I think that would be so inspiring. Like just actually seeing people walking around in that dress and things like that. And I think there's some actually in the UK as well. I think Yarrow Hall does one as well, but like I'll have to have a look. But yeah, I've got plans to go to as many castles and places like that as possible.
And how about you?
Very much like Sarah, anything can spark it off. Like seeing something or a conversation with someone. And I mean, my latest trilogy, the Match Made Marriages trilogy, was last summer. I was sitting of an evening with my husband, and the TV was just on in the background, and an advert for Love Island came up, and just the thought came into my mind, oh, I wonder what that would look like in the Regency era. And from that, I could not get rid of this thought. And it just kept sort of coming back. And I'd be lying in bed at night and thinking, oh, I could do this with that. I could do that with it. And it really came from just seeing out of the corner of my eye an advert and the thought just popped up. So I think it can come from absolutely anywhere.
That's such a good idea, to take something so modern as that and kind of twist it in a historical setting. I might have to do something similar. That sounds
it's so fun.
This reality TV.
It was so fun because you think everything was so different back then, but actually people are the same, and people do react in the same sort of ways. The rules might have been different, and the technology and what people can do, but human nature is the same, and so it's quite fun seeing those interactions play out in a different setup, which has kind of the same premise.
Yeah, because I was like, for this book, that I my first one in my Shield Maiden series, I always call it Persuasion with Longships, because I've just taken kind of that trope of second chance, Captain Wentworth styly stuff, but I've kind of mixed it so that the Captain Wentworth is my Shield Maiden, and it's all I think sometimes it's so cool to like take something that's like a Regency book and twist it to make it like a Viking story, and vice versa, and now reality TV. I'm doing.
So we will look out for the reality TV Viking series then.
Yes. That's our next one.
So I've got a hard one for you now. So Lucy, if you could describe your new book in 3 words, what would they be? So that will be so the Viking she would have married in 3 words.
Oh yeah, well I suppose Persuasion with Longships would be the one that I would go for. Yeah, because it's a second chance romance. So. And it's got all that yearning and all that longing between 2 people that it didn't work out for in the first place. So Persuasion with Longships.
And Sarah, how would you describe the Laird's Runaway Wife?
I can only think it's a Georgian romantic adventure. I cannot think of anything else because it goes from the Highlands down to London. But it is a bit second chance as well, I think, because it's a couple we've met before who really do need to get back together. So, but it's got adventure and it's got romance, and it's set in the Georgian. I can't do it in 3 words.
I think there were 3 great words. That sums it up beautifully. So, and Laura, so your upcoming release, The Marquis Meets His Match, Love Island in Regency.
It's a really hard question, isn't it, to put a book down to just a few words. I suppose it's fun because it is it's meant to be a light-hearted book. It's glamorous because it's got lots of balls and ball gowns and ballrooms and enemies to lovers kind of theme. But I always feel like I've got quite a few themes and tropes in there, so it's really hard to decide.
Wow, that's kind of that was the last question that I had for you. So it's been really lovely to chat all things historical and just hear a bit more about your kind of individual journeys to becoming published authors. Your writing process is always really fascinating to me, and also just where you get your inspiration from, and it's all so varied and always comes across so beautifully in your books, and all your new releases sound brilliant. So so check those out.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. It's been great fun.
All right, bye everyone. Enjoy the rest of your days.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.